Okay. Okay. Welcome everybody to the Jewish Study Center. I'm Jerry Garfinkel, and I'm the treasurer of the Jewish Study Center. And as such, I want to tell you that our classes, all our Zoom classes, are free. They're pretty good classes, I think, but we do have expenses. So we encourage people to give donations. We don't mandate it, but you're encouraged. So if you want to donate, go to our website, www.jewishstudycenter.org, and click on donate. And then you can donate from your PayPal account or with your credit card, or you can send a check. If you click on check, it'll give you the address on where to send it. Okay, I think that's my treasury um, mandate or task. As this, I'm also the technical director, whatever that means. So you all probably noticed that this is recorded. After the class is over, I'm going to probably post the recording, and I'll send an email out to everybody on where the recording is. And also, by the way, you notice that the closed captions are on. So if you have a difficulty understanding or hearing one of us, you can look at the closed captions. Everybody is muted, but we do want your questions and your comments. Please put both of them in the chat box. Address it to everybody. Sometimes your question might be answered by somebody else in the audience. Same thing with your comments. And at the end of the presentation, Mindy Reiser will be running the Q&A, and then some of your questions will be answered then. But direct all your questions to everybody. Okay, so at this point, I will introduce Mindy. Mindy Reiser is our vice president, and she will then introduce the two speakers for today. Mindy, you're on.
It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce our two speakers. And we'll start with Dr. Malka Simkovich, and she is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Publication Society and visiting professor at Yeshiva University's Revel Graduate School for Jewish Studies. Her first book, The Making of Jewish Universalism, From Exile to Alexandria, was published in 2016, and her second book, Discovering Second Temple Literature, The Scriptures and Stories That Shaped Early Judaism, was published with JPS in 2018 and received the 2019 American Jewish Libraries Association Judaica Reference Honor Award. Her third book, Letters from Home, The Creation of Diaspora in Jewish Antiquity, was published in June 2024. She is also the author of over 100 published articles, including pieces that have been published in a wide array of journals, from the Harvard Theological Review to the Jewish Review of Books to the Christian Century. She is a Leon Charney Fellow at Yeshiva University's Center for Israel Studies, a Sachs Scholar for the Rabbi Jonathan Sachs Foundation, and a Kogod Research Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. She served as the Crown Ryan Chair of Jewish Studies at Catholic Theological Union from 20 to 24, and she speaks regularly to audience across North America and beyond on topics related to the Hebrew Bible, Jewish history, and contemporary Jewish-Christian relations. And now let me turn to Jewish Studies Center President Amy E. Schwartz, who is the opinion and book review editor of Moment magazine. Before that, she was a longtime editorial writer and op-ed columnist at the Washington Post. She specialized in education and culture. Amy is the editor of the 2020 volume, Can Robots Be Jewish? And Other Pressing Questions of Modern Life. And of course, she has taught classes at the Jewish Study Center, including a very well received multi-year series on the Psalms, Tehillim. Ladies, up to you now.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mindy, and thank you so much, Malka, for agreeing to do this, to be with us for this conversation.
It is my pleasure.
So I'm gonna start by framing this conversation in what I hope is not too self-serving a way. And that is one of the things I do, as just stated, is I'm a book review editor for Moment Magazine. And so a lot of Jewish books come across my desk. And I am hoping that among the things we discuss in talking about the Jewish Publication Society and sort of the landscape in which it works, um, I will come to understand something about the forces that drive these waves of review copies that come across my desk. Sometimes it's all memoirs, and sometimes it's all theology. And one month, several years ago, I got three separate scholarly books about the Jews of Vienna for some reason, from different sources. And lately, every rabbi that you've ever heard of has written a book about what it means to be Jewish today. And so, I'm hoping we can talk at some, later in this conversation about how the market works, like, how the market works for publishing Jewish books, and how it's, whether it's different or the same as, the rest of the publishing market generally. But let's take a step back first. Tell us about yourself. You've just taken on this tremendously influential job not too long ago. And how did you end up being the head of the Jewish Publication Society? What's your background?
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for the questions, and thanks to the organizers of tonight's event, and thanks to all of you for joining on this Mother's Day. The way that I came to join JPS is, I think, serendipitous. I was in academia for 10 years. I'm a literary historian of the Second Temple era. My work considers how we get from the end of the biblical era, at least the biblical era as Jews conceive it, how we get from the end of the Hebrew Bible into the world of the rabbis. There's about 600 years in between, and that's my field. Because I was hired in 2014 at a Catholic Theological Union, and I was the only Jew on campus, the only Jewish faculty, and there were no Jewish students, I was thrown into the world of theological discourse and interreligious dialogue, totally untrained and unprepared. So for the past 10 years, I've been just by default the resident Jew in a very good and a very positive way. And that certainly has impacted the work that I've been interested in, and has influenced, I would say, scholarly explorations, I hope, of how Jews interacted with early followers of Jesus in the ancient world. I was working on a book with my predecessor at JPS, Eli Sachs, who was the director and editor-in-chief briefly at JPS. Eli decided after October 7th that he wanted to be back in the classroom, and we were having a conversation about the book that I'm still working on. I've made very little progress over the past year, to be honest. And in that conversation, Eli brought up the fact that there's a vacancy at JPS, and would I be interested? I had never considered such a position. I never considered such a job. I had done editing work. I was on the I was on the editorial board of the Harvard Theological Review, and also Bible Odyssey, which is affiliated with the Society for Biblical Literature. So I had served on some boards. I had done kind of light editorial work, but nothing at this kind of level of intensity or responsibility. So I did not think that I was the person that they would want. And what do you know? 4 months later, I signed a contract.
And those were all sort of more interfaith type of settings, right? So this is a specifically Jewish enterprise. Was that new to you as well?
This is actually only my second job, meaning I was at Catholic Theological Union for a long time. It was the first job I got.
Wow.
Even before I finished my doctorate, I was hired by CTU. So the only professional setting that I've known is the Catholic one. And by the way, the Pope, our new Pope, earned a Master's of Divinity from Catholic Theological Union in 1982, so we did not overlap, sadly. But absolutely, my professional setting has been Catholic.
That's so interesting. And I remember reading somewhere that this is the first pope ever to have a degree in theology from this institution, which is actually kind of funny.
Absolutely. Well, there are many firsts with this pope. The fact that he's an American pope is extraordinary.
Right? If you've been in the Catholic theological setting all these years, you must be one of the only people like in America who actually understands the discourse about what he thinks and what he might believe.
You know what? We don't know yet.
Right.
Even my colleagues who've been doing Catholic Jewish dialogue for 5 or 6 decades don't know. But there are many good signs. The fact that he even named himself Leo, by the way, after Leo the 13th in the late 19th century, who was so concerned about conditions for the working poor, it seems to be that he'll be following the footsteps of Francis.
Yeah, interesting. So many possible classes on this in the future.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us about the. I want to ask about the proud history of the Jewish Publication Society, and and then if you can talk a little bit about how it started and how it fits today into the landscape of American publishing. Where how it's part of the landscape and how it's different.
Absolutely. JPS has an incredible history, and I'm not a historian of JPS. My area of scholarly interest is 2,000 years before its founding. So I would highly recommend, if anyone has not read Jonathan Sarna's book on JPS, it's called JPS: The Americanization of Jewish Culture. It is outstanding. It is such a great read. So I'll just give some high level comments about JPS, but I'm not going to give a linear history. I'll just say a few things. The founding of JPS had some starts and stops from the middle of the 19th century until it finally got going after a third effort to launch the organization in Philadelphia in 1888. So now we say that JPS was founded in 1888, but really 30, 40 years ago, Jewish intellectuals and leaders and rabbinic scholars were talking about how to launch a press for Jewish people in the English-speaking world. So this had been on the table for decades. And one of the wonderful things about JPS is the way in which it honored women's scholarship. So many people don't know that Henrietta Zold, who was the founder of Hadassah, and today she's remembered in association with the early Zionist movement and with Hadassah specifically. Henrietta Zold, in her time, was known for her work as the most prominent editor at the Jewish Publication Society, and deeply respected by the luminaries with whom she worked and trusted. She produced the famous index of Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews. This sounds silly, maybe we might think anybody can make an index, but actually without technology, or without the technology that we have, you need an extraordinary memory and discipline and patience and erudition to put together what she did. And the patience and the sacrifice, it's amazing. And
She didn't get a whole lot of credit for it, did she, at the
did not.
time?
No,
Yeah.
she did not. And in fact, Sarna is very empathetic to her in his volume. It seems that she really did suffer quite a bit, feeling unacknowledged and feeling perhaps unrecognized. And that's quite a sad part of the story. One of the other interesting things is that JPS's very first book was published by, it was a book written by a woman, Lady Katie Magnus, A History of the Jewish People. Yes, so those are just some interesting tidbits, but I want to say something else about the moment, so to speak, what's going on in 1888. This is an era of obviously high levels of Jewish migration from Europe. It's an era in which Jews are encountering I would say many existential questions about their future in the United States, concern about anti-Jewish backlash as Jews attempt to integrate, perhaps not assimilate, but to integrate into their broader American society. There are all kinds of questions that arise. To what extent are they expected to give up their customs, their ancestral laws? To what extent are there going to be doors not just locked? Sorry, I was going to say not just closed, but also locked to them. And this is also a time when Jews begin to find themselves trying to enter interprofessional spaces and encountering quotas. So when you look at this picture, and I'm not just talking about the literary world, I'm talking about the broader world. I'm talking about Jews entering or trying to enter medical school and other kind of professional academies, and they're being told essentially, get out of here. One of the phenomena is that they start their own institutions. They begin to institution build. And so we find the beginning of Jewish hospitals, right? And there's a kind of attitude of, these doors have been closed to us, and so we're going to do it. Maybe we'll even do it better. And it's out of this, I would say, resilience that Jews, and these are Jews in New York and Philadelphia primarily, say, we need a Jewish press. We need to be able to control the books that we're putting out. And it's much more than books. It's really about the Jewish idea. It's about the Jewish creative mind. So Amy, maybe I'll stop there. I don't know if you have any questions.
Well, that's very interesting, and particularly, I mean, you mentioned the Sarna book, and the way he frames it, the Americanization of Jewish scholarship, of Jewish knowledge, and
Sure.
of Jewish culture. I mean, that sounds like it's the flip side. You create your own institutions, and then that turns out to be how you get into the mainstream. That's something you see in a lot of Jewish culture.
And I love the fact, I'm just building on what you've just said and agreeing with you. I love the fact that at the heart of JPS's legacy is a Bible. Because I think when we talk about JPS, a lot of people, at least in my circles, will say, oh yeah, so you guys just put out Bibles, right? Oh, right. Well, you have other books too, but really it's the Bible. And, I want to say to these people, but what's more exciting? What's more important? What's more central to Jewish self-understanding? And as someone who studies early Judaism by training, I look at what Jewish life was like in Greek-speaking lands in the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE. I think about the importance of having access to foundational scriptural texts. So what does it mean that JPS just put out a Bible? Like, who cares, right? They could have used King James, they could have used other Christian translations, but in producing an authoritative, elegant, beautiful Jewish version of the Bible in English, the Jews are saying something very profound to the world. They're taking ownership over their scriptures, and they're saying every Jew in the English-speaking world can and should have access to their scriptural tradition and do so in a way that honors the integrity of their own American identity. And so when I think about the production of the JPS Bible, I also think of the production of the Septuagint at the end of the 3rd century BCE, this magisterial translation of the Hebrew Torah into Greek for Greek-speaking Jews that imbued them with so much pride and so much sense of importance in a good way. I also think about the Targumim, the Aramaic translations of the Torah that were produced over the course of the next 3 or 4 centuries. Translations and good translations that are authoritative and reliable, are really important because they help Jews feel at home and connected to their ancestry, connected to their tradition.
It's interesting, right? I mean, I think a lot of the early JPS Bibles that I've seen anyway have been sort of straining to sound different from the King James Bible, but not too different because, people are used to that, maybe educated Jews who, grew up in in a context like you've been working in, in a context, a Christian cultural context, have a sense of how the Bible should sound, but it's got to be just different enough to not be the King James. I mean, is that something that over the years you've seen evolve? I mean, do you know how many Bible editions offhand the JPS has done? It's quite a few, isn't it?
Well, yes, there are the official JPS translations, and then there are silent changes that are made without fanfare that are kind of tucked into reprints. Amy, I learned all about this over the past year. If you had asked me a year or two ago, explain to me how all these silent changes are made, I would have said, I actually don't know what you're talking about. But yes, there's the first, what's now called the OJPS, the Old Jewish Publication Society translation. I don't know that I like that O over there because it's such an incredible translation. Then there's the NJPS, the new JPS that was published in the 1980s. Most recently, we have the RJPS, the Revised Jewish Publication Society translation, which just came out. And it presents itself as a more gender sensitive translation. And I know some people have a kind of visceral reaction to that. They feel like maybe it's politicizing the Bible, or maybe it's kind of undermining the integrity of earlier editions. And I will just say, read the introduction by the editor, David Stein, because this is a very intentional, very academic translation that I find to be, I'm biased, but I find it to be very thoughtful and worth a look, because it's really incredible what the editorial team did. And even to this edition, to the RJPS, we're already, just a year out of its publication, we're already issuing some silent changes. But I think it's phenomenal. And whatever translation floats your boat, you might like the more formal, kind of old sounding translation, and that's fine too.
What do you mean by silent changes? Do you mean without a new edition, or what's a silent change?
Exactly. So let's say we put out, let's say we print 20 to 25,000 copies of the Bible at a time. So before we do a new reprint, we might say, okay, we have a few, we're either going to post these changes onto the website. That's the easiest thing to do, is to just say, okay, you're going to buy your RJPS, but just so you know, and these are very minor changes. These are not changing, that we're not like adding an 11th commandment to the 10. There's no 8 days of creation. We're talking syntactical, we're talking order of words. I mean, really, what most people would take as minor and not content related, but scholars would take seriously. There was recently a discussion about a verse about Moses in the beginning of Exodus, as we introduced this figure. Should Moses's name be at the beginning of the verse and follow the Hebrew in that way? But there are also reasons to maybe have him later on in the verse. So a lot of it has to do with word order. So these are interesting questions, but I don't know that the stakes are extremely high unless you're a very, very close reader of the text.
Sounds to me like the around my Seder table, and everyone's got the red and yellow book, but everyone's got a different edition of it with a slightly different translation. So you try to read together, and everyone's got a slightly different wording, but they're silent. Like they're not marked. It's just you come to it's like, oh wait, this one says the eternal, this one says the Lord, this one says the children, and this one says the four sons, and over the years. So aside from the Bible, if we could talk about the Bible probably the entire class, and no one would be sorry, because it's infinite. But I noticed, I mean, when you just look at the way the JPS catalog is laid out, you've got the reference library, which is the looks like the well, what it says, the reference library. It's sort of the Jewish canon. And then there's new books that are more sort of one-offs, and books by current rabbis, and books on contemporary topics. So what's the balance there? First of all, which is the economic engine of the press? I mean, which one sells more? And then, like, how do you address that? Like, do you think about, well, what should be in the Jewish canon and what's missing here, or do you just build it up over time incrementally?
This is a great question. So the economic engine is the legacy work. The economic engine
The Bible, basically.
the Bible and our incredible Bible commentaries. This is really the foundation of the press, and you can see that in our sales. You can see really this is the vast majority of our sales is that legacy work. And of course, as you know, that legacy work has to be balanced with other volumes that address Jewish theology, ethics, and contemporary issues. And I would say, as I'm considering the JPS of the future and our publishing program and what we want it to look like in 5 years and 10 years, it's hard to avoid the fact that we seem to really be on a historical precipice when it comes to Jewish history at this Jewish moment. So some of the some of the books that I'm commissioning are more contemporary. So for example, I'm trying to find, if anybody on this call knows who the author will be, I'm trying to find someone to write a book on Jewish Christian dialogue after October 7th. This book has to be written. It has to be written. I tried to write it, but I don't have time. Someone has to write this book. Another book that I'm interested in, tragically, is eulogies and the theology embedded in eulogies. At first, I was thinking about it in a post-October 7th context, because you could see so much of the eulogies and the way that parents, religious, not religious, Zionist, not Zionist, you could see so much in the way that they talk about loss and sacrifice in Judaism. I just thought it was fascinating. But then as I was thinking about this project, really there's no reason to limit it to the past year and a half. And so that's another volume. I think I just found someone to write this book. So I'm excited about that. But then of course, we're 3 years away from holding the book in our hands, or maybe more. So definitely there's an attention to the contemporary moment. And, that's what makes JPS, I think, really important, is its resilience. It's taking the current moment, whenever that moment was, seriously, and saying, what questions are Jews asking now? What ideas should they be encountering now? So it is a balance of that contemporary work and that the legacy of JPS, which is outstanding high-level biblical scholarship.
And do you sell a lot of books to, like, for service type books, not like a Siddur, but like I notice a large, there's a whole department of Parsha commentary, round through the year with this commentator, through the year with that commentator, and from the Shai Held, the 2-volume set, to more traditional authors. I think is there a Kaplan one?
Yes.
Someone else published. Anyway, so I mean, are those also, is this like a textbook publication in some ways? I mean, do you sell them to schools?
We definitely get bulk orders, but I'm not sure that the schools are ordering Parsha books in bulk. I will say also, Amy, I get a lot of submissions for homilies. So many.
Oh, I bet.
Probably more than any other genre is the genre of here are the homilies that I've given, 52, one for each Torah portion of the year. And, I'm so looking forward to you publishing this and selling 10,000 copies. I mean, to be honest, I can't take most of them. But then you have happy exceptions. And so I don't know what the future holds with Parsha books. But Michael Karasik's commentary, to the Torah, and other volumes that kind of interpret the Torah Parsha by Parsha are outstanding. We actually do have a couple coming out that I'm extremely excited about. Are those being purchased in bulk by schools? I think no. The schools primarily are buying the Bibles. And actually, it's an interesting question as to what extent can we partner with organizations and institutions to buy our other books in bulk. And we have had some success with that. But not with the Parsha books.
Right. No, I don't know. I just mentioned the Parsha books because it came to my mind. It's this, what you say about the type of submissions. I will say, speaking a little out of school, this is not entirely dissimilar from the experience of being an editor at a Jewish magazine, because a lot of rabbis who write these things every week, they really would like to see them published, and so
nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
I mean, everyone, and it's nice to think that so much good writing is being done everywhere, in every synagogue every week. Interesting.
I want to take it all. I would love to take it all, but we can't. I get a lot of submission for young adult, for children's books, graphic novels, fiction, poetry. These are not JPS's genres right now. And they used to be 30, 40 years ago, but that's not the current focus. We get a lot of memoirs, and we take some memoirs, but they have to be telling a bigger story, unfortunately. That it really is a shame. It feels a little cruel to say that. But, I'm looking for something that tells the reader about, one individual, and also something about the bigger moment in which they lived. I also sadly get a lot of Holocaust books, a lot. And some of them, again, we'll consider, but many of them, to be very honest, it takes me a few minutes to realize this can't go to JPS. We had, I don't want to say this glibly or kind of disrespectfully, but I'll just give you an example. We had a graphic novel submitted, and it was a beautifully illustrated graphic novel that told the story of a second generation survivor's parents in the Holocaust. And this graphic novel told the story of this family from the perspective of the family dog. Now, this is actually very creative. It was a very creative novel. It's not going to be a JPS book.
Right.
And so how do you go to someone and say, you put your heart and soul into this, you found the perfect vantage point, you had this incredible story of survival, and you have to find another press. And what I've really tried to do is always recommend another specific press, not just say, this doesn't work, see you never, but try. In that case, it was hard, but try to give a recommendation. This isn't right for us. Why don't you try this other place? It might be a perfect fit.
That's really above and beyond what most writers would say most publishers do, even if they can get a read, People just say no, 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 they don't send them on. But I mean, that leads me to another one of the questions I had before about sort of how this fits in the landscape. Is one of the reasons JPS no longer publishes, you say there was once a fiction list and, a poetry list and so forth. Did that end because other Jewish books were being published, stories like that were being published in the mainstream, that you don't need JPS to publish Jewish fiction because like whatever Jewish fiction is?
This is a question that I'm not sure I have a full answer to. I know that there was a lot of investment, both in terms of time and money, into young adult and children's books at the end of the 20th century in the 80s and 90s. And for whatever reason,
You mean in other places?
No, sorry?
You mean by JPS?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
JPS published books, and they invested a lot of money in children's literature. And again, I'm hearing this from others without having encountered it directly. So it could be that someone else, will reach out to you and say, hey, I worked at JPS in the 90s and here's the fuller story. But my understanding is that they just lost money. They couldn't sustain it.
Oh, that's interesting. Because now a lot of Jewish children's, like young children's books, are put out by specific sort of organizations just for that, like Car Ben, and what's the one that sends you a book every month?
Library.
Right,
Yeah.
JP Library. So that wasn't, is that so commercial? I'm not sure exactly what I'm asking, but I guess so. JPS found that regular commercial distribution didn't work for books like this, so maybe that's why they found these other outlets.
Maybe it was spread too thin and they weren't able to properly market each of these genres. I don't have the answer to that. I just know that they lost money. And also my understanding, as a not-for-profit press, JPS has asked for subventions from writers when there's a particular case of, expensive illustrations. That again speaks to the problem with graphic novels. I see somebody ask that in the chat. Graphic novels are very, very expensive. So if you're going to do kind of each story, you need the illustrator or the writer to provide huge sums because they're very, very expensive. This is sad. You want to make decisions based on the integrity, the content, but there are other considerations for a not-for-profit press where, we don't want to go to the author every single, for every single project and say, okay, this is great, give us $40,000. But when you don't do that, you need to have a profit and loss statement. You need to have some sense of a kind of a trajectory of sales, not just that we'll sell a certain amount, but that we'll sell a certain amount within a specific time frame. And that does put a degree of pressure on the press itself, especially a small one with limited marketing resources. And so, of course, we want to take risks and we want to invest in the, in the best Jewish thinkers of our time. But we also have to take into consideration our bottom line. That's the balance. And it's a tough one.
So, but also I'm thinking, like, for instance, you talk about graphic novels, and I I guess I want to ask you about like trends. There are trends, right, in publishing and I guess in Jewish publishing as well. But like for instance, when Mouse came out, not from a Jewish press per se, but completely um, a mainstream publication. And I don't mean mainstream in a pejorative way, like
Right.
somehow JPS isn't the mainstream, but you know what I mean, a sort of a not a non-specific, a trade press. Um, that seems like it sparked a lot of interest in books like that, not specifically by Jewish presses. And certainly that was true of Holocaust memoirs for a period.
Mhm.
So is that still the case? Is there, I mean, I hear people saying that sort of Jewish stories that were of, or Jewish writers telling Jewish stories that were so mainstream in a lot of, commercial publishing for such a long time are not so much so now.
I'm not sure I'm getting to your question. Are you asking whether there are still a lot of Holocaust books being submitted?
No, I'm just wondering, like, is there a sort of a push-pull between what JPS brings out because there isn't another place for these kinds
Ah,
of Jewish stories being told versus the wider culture being more interested in publishing those? Is there a seesaw? I mean, are you smaller because there are more outlets for Jews in the mainstream, or?
I'm going to speak from my anecdotal experience and from my conversations with other writers, both in the academic world and also in the more popular writing world. It seems to me that over the past 10 years, the number of platforms that are welcoming Jewish writers, and I'm not just talking about writers of Jewish content, I'm talking about Jewish writers,
Hmm.
seems that these platforms are diminishing. Presses that used to put out a lot of Jewish content or support Jewish writers in other ways are now subtly or less subtly signaling that these projects are no longer welcome. I am hearing from many writers who actually went to other presses and JPS was not their first choice. And they said, look, I had this project at this particular press. And then they said to me, this is great. You wrote a book on ethics. You're an ethicist. Just take out. I see you have some references to Jewish sources. Take those out. Yes, this is real. This is a story that has come to me. And that's one of many examples. And so I find myself wondering whether JPS should expand based on the fact that Jewish writers, especially those producing Jewish content, are having a very difficult time finding a supportive press. And especially, I would say, novelists. I'm hearing from a lot of novelists how hard it's been. And Dara Horn, of course, has written about this so much. There are certain kinds of Jewish stories that are welcome. There are many, many Holocaust books. The world is saturated with Holocaust books. And of course, the stories should be told, at least the true ones. When I go to the airport and I go to, what's it called? Hudson, I don't know what it's called, those bookstores.
Yeah, Hudson, yeah, or
You're
ink.
about to go on a plane and you're looking for something light. I feel I have a negative visceral reaction to how many Holocaust books I see in the airport. Um, I feel that there is a profound disproportion here. And, uh, you know, again, those stories have to be told. Where are the books celebrating the vibrancy and diversity of Jewish life? I want to put out those books. So JPS should put out some Holocaust memoirs, and it needs to be balanced with other volumes that explore contemporary, diverse, vibrant, living Judaism. So, for example, we're working right now on a book on the Jews of Libya. How many of us are experts on the Jews of Libya? Now, it
Right.
seems very specialized. Who
Are
is
there,
interested
there's
in the Jews of Libya?
a current book about the current Jews of Libya or a history book?
Well, it starts from a few centuries ago, and then it takes us on a journey through the 20th century, and then of course the ending is quite sobering because there's almost no one there, but that's part of the story, right? That's part of the book.
I
But
don't
it's
know
a
how
very
Dara Horn would feel
celebratory.
about that. It's still dead
What?
Jews. I don't know how Dara Horn would feel about that. It's still dead Jews,
You
right?
know what though? It's a it's I don't know how to say this in a compelling way, but it's actually uplifting and celebratory and positive. It's not a story of, the lachrymose tale of Jewish history. It's not just oppression after oppression. Look, that's part of it. But there's also a vibrancy. There's a culture. There's just very, I would say inspiring story to tell. And that's not the only example. I'm really looking for these stories. What is the diversity? When I go onto Netflix, how are Jews represented? The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, my Catholic students, by the way, love to tell me how that was their favorite show. And again, I cringe. Seinfeld, very, very funny. And in my mind doesn't get old, but there's a certain kind of a Jew that's very visible. And then there's, many, many other Jews out there and cultural settings, and those stories need to be told. So again, I'm looking for projects that celebrate the diversity of living Judaism.
And do you have the freedom to just select this list, or do you have to work through with an editorial board or within constraints, or can you say this is what we should be publishing and go out and commission it?
I'm very lucky that I have the ability to be an autocrat because we're such a small team. But one of the first things that I did at JPS was I formed a committee in my board, an editorial committee. And that board does not look at every proposal because that would be impossible. They're volunteers and I get proposals every day. That board does review difficult proposals where either the subject is something that's kind of out of my purview, or I'm on the fence, I'm ambivalent for a certain reason, and I want to consult with them. So they've been enormously helpful. I would say 90 to 95% of proposals are not brought to that committee. And then, of course, everything goes out for peer review. So we look for experts and specialists who work on the topic of the book in question and can really speak to the integrity of the argument. But that initial decision, when the proposal comes into my inbox, that initial decision to move forward or not move forward is made by me.
And then if you have something in mind to commission, you can do that as well.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things, you mentioned peer review, and that made me think JPS is kind of it's in some ways it's an academic press, and in some ways it's a what would you call it? A trade press. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Is it kind of was it always such a hybrid? It seems like maybe it was more academic in the past, but now you're sounding like maybe that's wrong.
It's gone through iterations. It was so interesting. I was just looking at the society's original 7 governing principles because in advance of tonight's event, I wanted to kind of brush up on what the situation looked like in 1888. And in their 7 governing principles, and you can find this in Sarna's book on JPS, he's also written about it in a few articles, the core team talk about here, I'm just going to pull it up. They say the 4th of the 7 principles is our literature must in the main, this is not contemporary language, but must in the main be popular, that is adapted for general reading rather than for scholars in special branches. And then the 5th governing principle, it must aspire to excellence of style and tone. And as a rule, it must be in the English language. This is really interesting. The 7th one is the publication committee must have in view the sole purpose of doing the most good. And to that end must be entirely free of prejudice for or against particular opinions or persons, since all Jews of every shade of belief are equally concerned in our work. And so you really get a sense that this is a team, and they're scholarly. We're talking about some of the greatest scholars of the turn of the century. They want to reach living rooms. They want to reach Jews who are not in the ivory tower, who are not part of the clergy, who are not in rabbinic stations. And that is the mission that they begin with. Now, again, there are ebbs and flows, and you can kind of trace, some decades they're putting out more of a legacy work, and some decades maybe less so. But I do think that at the core, of JPS is this idea that we can reach the highest standards of academic excellence and reach anybody who's interested in big Jewish ideas. That balance is neither exclusively academic nor exclusively popular.
And I noticed some years ago you started partnering with an academic press, right? With University of Nebraska Press. Was that a financial thing, or does that change the nature of the list at all?
It was a financial decision made in 2012 after JPS had some economic hardships, like many presses at the time. And the idea was that UNP, University of Nebraska Press, would take on all the non-editorial work of the press. So once the book is a complete and final manuscript, it goes to UNP and they take care of the design, printing, shipping, warehousing, distribution, advertising, marketing, all of that. And of course, a nice chunk of our sales, as you can imagine. But this arrangement is not atypical for small Jewish presses. The Littman Library of Jewish Civilization, which is an excellent little press based in Europe, partners with Liverpool University Press, Brandeis University Press, which also puts out excellent books that many of which are popular in the sense that they're geared towards a non-specialist audience. They partner with University of Chicago Press. So this is not unheard of, and outside of the Jewish world, it's also very common for a small press to partner with a bigger one. And that was the idea. At the time, the reason why JPS reached out to University of Nebraska, of all places, it's actually an excellent press, and they put out 140 books a year. It's one of the strongest and most, I guess I would say, productive presses in the country. But the reason why JPS partnered with them specifically is that its director, Donna Shear, had worked at JPS in the 90s and really had a profound love for JPS, understood its mission, and that was a real partnership and kind of a mutual understanding of mission that led to some fantastic books in the 2010s.
That's really interesting. I see them. That's how I see the JPS catalog. Typically, it's inside the University of Nebraska Press catalog that I get mailed. And so I've noticed some other university presses. I know there's a whole story to be told about the pressures on university presses and how a lot of them maybe have been pushed sort of more towards a mission like JPS's mission, which is, to reach out, not only to do scholarship, but to make it accessible and saleable in some way. So, like, for instance, Yale University Press has this series called Jewish Lives, which is biographies of Jewish figures, and it's sort of scholarly, but sort of semi. And then there's Princeton University Press, which has this thing called Lives of the Great Religious Books, which has a lot of Jewish content. Like, where does that fit into the picture? Like, why are they doing this, and are they competition for you?
That's really interesting. I have encountered so much collegiality with these other presses. I wish I had some kind of juicy tea to
No, if it's good news,
But I have reached out to many directors of small presses and also administrators at the American Association of University Presses. And there is really a sense of collegiality, maybe because this is hard work and you have to be committed to the mission. You have to be committed to the idea that books are really valuable. But I don't view them as competition. If you take a press like Princeton, I do think it is more academic. The print run is lower, which, it's not just about the print run, it's also about who they're expecting to purchase the book. Many of those books will go to university libraries and specialists. Now, there are also trade books or kind of trade style books that they're publishing, but there's room enough for everybody. I'm not just saying that to be boring. I've been given a lot of great advice by directors of small presses who are interested in helping JPS to succeed. I know that actually sounds counterintuitive. They should not be helping me, and yet they do.
I don't know. It could be synergy. I mean, the more content there is out there, maybe the healthier it is for the audience. I could see that.
I do think
Um,
that there's a sense that we're doing different things.
mm.
Yeah.
And that's and if that's the case, then like what's the thing that is like what's the thing that JPS is doing that wouldn't I'm not trying to challenge you, I'm just curious, that like wouldn't include a series of biographies of Jewish lives, like what's the how do you define that in your head?
I'd be happy to publish a series called Jewish Lives, and we do have something comparable. We do have series that focus on great Jewish thinkers. Gosh, what is it? We have the Essential Judaism series. We've got the Anthologies of Jewish Thought series. So we've got a number of series where, you could put those books into a JPS series, and with very minor changes, I think it would be very successful. I think of JPS as a cultural phenomenon. I think of it as being squarely in the Jewish world, and maybe that's incorrect. I should be thinking more about our non-Jewish readers. And I know that that's true because I'll get emails from people all over the world, not Jewish people, saying, how can I order internationally? Or I really love this book. Can you help me order something else? Or, what Bible do you recommend? So, we have to be attuned to the world beyond the kind of the Jewish living rooms that I imagine in my head. At the same time, I want JPS to be more about books. I want JPS to be about bringing great Jewish ideas into the world. I want it to be about building reading communities that cross denominations. And I want it to be about partnerships that come out of these reading communities. So I'm thinking about JPS not just as a publisher, not just as a printer, God forbid, but really as a purveyor of great Jewish ideas. That's a little bit of a different approach.
Hmm. Hmm. You mentioned at the start of this conversation, you also said something about interfaith and interreligious dialogue. That maybe that's something that the press needs to take on.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And like I said, the books that I'm looking for now, um, I mentioned the Jewish Christian dialogue after October 7th book, and that I still don't have a writer for it. But there are other books too in the publishing program. I think we have to think about how Judaism's place and the Jewish people's place in the broader world right now. That's part of building a contemporary and relevant publishing plan. There's, yeah, there, I was going to say there's nothing more important. Maybe the Bible is more important, but certainly that's part of the core work that I want to do.
What do you feel is your mission to be publishing about Israel, if anything, right now?
That's a great question. I don't know that we need to publish about Israel. We definitely want to support great Jewish writers based in Israel. I will tell you, we're putting out a very important book in October 2025 by Raphael Medoff called The Road to October 7th, which is, it's going to be a very difficult but infinitely important read about the events of October 7th and the propaganda that led up to that awful day. It's a book without peer or parallel in the publishing world, and I think that it'll be an essential part of the archive that will be built around this event. So there will be scholarship coming out about October 7th and likely the consequent war. But what's equally interesting to me is what's happening in the literary world in Israel. The quantity of proposals that I'm getting from Israeli writers who have written a successful book in Hebrew and are looking for support to translate and publish their book in English. Sometimes those books have nothing to do with the contemporary moment. We're working on a great book now on the origins of Jewish holidays by a very esteemed Bible professor in Israel, and his book in Hebrew on the holidays sold thousands of copies. And so we're hoping to do the same with a translation that makes some changes, but with a translation in English. So some of these Israeli writers, they're scholars trying to do their work. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that for many of them, they didn't go to JPS first. They tried other places and they were told no. I'm not so proud as to say, well, you went to these 3 places first, I'm not going to take you. We're not precious. We're not so precious that we're going to let our pride get in the way of bringing a great book into the world. And sometimes we are their first choice, so that's nice. But the bigger question is not, were we first? The bigger question is this a book that holds water, that makes a contribution, that is well written, well argued, and so on.
Is a big part of your list books in modern Israel, books written in modern Israel in Hebrew now that are translated, or I
Not
mean,
a
is that
big, no. I would
not big?
say I can think of three. No, no, no. Look, maybe that's 5%. It's maybe even less than 5%.
Hmm.
Let's say there are 3 to 5 books that we're working on or that we're in conversation with the authors about translating and publishing their books. So not, I wouldn't say a huge number.
Okay, so I'm getting near the point where Mindy will have to take over, but I did have two other things I wanted to ask briefly. One is about technology. I mean, obviously, Jewish books start with the scroll, and have been through any number of different technologies and transitions. But there lately probably is one of the big ones. You've not been at the press through sort of the big shift to online reading and online publishing, but is that something that JPS is still navigating, or do you feel like the biggest changes are past?
I thought you were going to ask about AI, and I was worried about
I AI is in there.
it. You're asking about digitizing books online.
Well, or maybe that's not as big an issue as AI. Like, what
Now,
are
let
the
me
big
answer the
technological?
digitizing because AI is a huge question. That's a huge
Mhm.
issue and totally open-ended and uncertain.
What's
We,
the yeah?
sorry,
Yeah, what? Go ahead.
we partnered with Safaria a couple years ago to digitize the NJPS, which is now available for free to anyone who can access Safaria. You can use NJPS for free. Obviously, there was a financial arrangement that was made between JPS and Safaria, and now we're maybe considering or at least asking the question: is there room for us to discuss the digitization of other classic JPS works or maybe newer works? That does seem to be the direction that the world is going in. And of course, the big question is, does that impact book sales?
Yeah,
And
if that's your engine, you said the Bibles are your engine. That seems like a big deal.
this is the question, and I've heard both sides argued passionately and confidently. I've heard people say the data does not support a change in sales when books are digitized. And of course, as you can imagine, I've heard the opposite as well. But the truth is, when it comes to the Bible, it doesn't seem like it has made a huge dent in our sales. This is really interesting. Now, there are all kinds of reasons why. It could be that we have enough. This is one theory, and you can tell me if you think it's crazy. It could be that we have enough Sabbath observant readers who still need books on their shelves. It's
Or
possible,
like in shul. I mean, you
right?
gotta have a
Or
book with you.
absolutely. And like I said, we have huge bulk orders for schools, Jewish organizations, synagogues. They're ordering the Tanakh. They're
Mhm.
ordering, the Tanakh and maybe commentaries. So certainly, when we're talking about those bigger orders, they still want books on their shelves. Absolutely. What
Presumably, you don't sell biblical concordances anymore now that there's Boolean search, right?
I know, we're moving. My family is moving from Chicago to New Jersey next month, and I just looked at my concordance and I thought, I haven't opened this in 15 years. I mean, I haven't even taken it off the shelf. What am I
Do you want to
can't
just
even
for the
upload it?
group, do you want to explain what a concordance is in case anyone doesn't know? I think this is a
Of
pretty scholarly audience, but just in case.
Of course. The concordance, which I used all the time as a kid, is a big book where you can look up a word and you can find a citation of every verse in the Hebrew Bible where that word is used. So it's great. It's still great in theory, I guess, on a Shabbat afternoon if you don't use it like electronics, but practically it has not been used in my house. And I can't even think of someone who would want this concordance. Um,
Yeah.
you know, what?
Such a shame. I love these big volumes.
Well,
I
you
have to
can
say,
come
yeah, I
over
have
and
one
you can
too.
come.
Yeah.
So we don't know. Oh, someone just said she still uses her concordance.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
We don't know what the future is, but let's just say for now, the guarantees of our good friends at Safaria have held fast, which is we have not seen a significant dip in our sales, and our NJPS is available on safaria.org. Let's see what will be. Okay, now everyone's telling me that they use their concordances. All
That's
right.
great. I know this audience, the Jewish
Okay.
Study Center audience. Okay, that's such a nice upbeat note to end on. I think I'm gonna toss it over to Mindy to mine the very rich chat, which I haven't actually been keeping that much of an eye on, but it looks like there might be some questions. And if you run out of time of questions, Mindy, I have one more. I'm
Amy, why don't you pose your questions? They're always so incisive. Do that, and then I'll come up with some others.
Okay, I have just actually one more question, and this is more about Jewish publishing in general. One of the odd features of the Jewish book landscape is the Jewish Book Council, which, for those who don't know, is this fiendishly effective organization, which if you publish a book with any kind of a Jewish theme or content, I got a little taste of this when my rabbi's book came out in 2020, but since it was mid-COVID, I didn't get the full experience. Um, they you can pay them and you join in this gigantic sort of show and tell, and they package up everyone who's got one of these books, and they market them to all these sort of, any outlet that might want to have a feature a Jewish author, a JCC or a synagogue or a library, whatever. And it's amazing how well this works. And I'm just curious, first of all, does that have a significant effect on the shape of the market that you're working with, or does JPS just I mean, do you play that game, or do you exist in a separate sphere? And am I wrong in thinking it makes Jewish book sales or selling kind of different from other types?
It's interesting, this model of sending something like 115 copies of your own book to the Jewish Book Council, and then if you do their authors tour, they'll connect you with venues, hosts, organizations, and you do a tour. You don't make any money off of it, but presumably,
They pay for everything. I mean, if somebody pays for it. Yeah,
right, and your book will be sold. And
right.
so, in addition to the copies that you give them, your sales will go up. We do encourage, and I say this kind of with no little ambivalence. We do encourage our authors to, if they could afford it, and this is always the problem, to join the Jewish Book Council and their authors tour. I don't remember what it's called, but a lot of authors can't afford it. It's very expensive. It could be thousands of dollars, and we've had some very high profile authors who have a lot of marketing funds, and they might have their own agent, and they might have a PR person. And of course, there's a correlation between the marketing work that is done and the money that's poured into a book and the bottom line, the sales. We do encourage our authors to work with the JBC if they can. That's the reality. We're also very proud of the fact that we have a very high proportion of books that win the Jewish Book Award. Out of the 8 JPS books that were published this year, 2 of them were recognized by the National Jewish Book Awards. So we feel like when we put together a book, we do talk about the marketing plan. We do talk about how Jewish communities will receive the book and talk about the book. We imagine book clubs reading and discussing it. We, for many of our books, put study guides on our website, and some of those study guides are written by college students or interns. We're working on one right now for our 1 Samuel commentary that's coming out in December, which will be phenomenal. And so, the Jewish Book Council is part of, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but it's part of this bigger question of how do you get the book out into the world? A huge part of that is working with the JBC. You can avoid them, but why would you? They're like you said, they're very effective and very efficient. And we're in a world where if you sell 1,000 copies of your book in a year, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. No, they seem like a one-off to me. I mean, I've never come across them at that kind of thing in any other type of book.
Yeah. No, the only ambivalence I have is when an author says, I can't afford it. In every other way, it's great. It's an opportunity to bring your work into all these public spaces. I just wish that there was some, I know that there are foundations who help authors. I don't know to what extent there are enough opportunities for authors to subsidize the marketing of their books. Actually, now that you mention it, JBC is starting a marketing grant program. I don't remember if it has a name, but I did see a couple months ago that they're offering a marketing grant, which is this is really important. I think this gets to the heart of what I'm saying, which is everyone should have some kind of access. You know, it's such a shame to work 5, 7, 10 years on a book and then say, you know, I'd love to bring this into the world, but I don't have the funds. So that should never happen, but it happens all the time.
All right.
JBC is
Well,
great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's toss this. Thank you so much. I've
Thank you.
a lot of things we could ask more. I could ask more about, but it's just great to hear all about this fabulous endeavor. That's long may it continue. It's
Thank
such
you,
a
Amy.
long history. Is it true? This is just a piece of trivia that I think I heard. Is it true that the first book printed in the New World on a printing press was a version of a book of the Psalms in Hebrew?
I've heard this too, but I can't verify. Maybe
Yeah,
someone else on the call can verify.
that
I
comes
have,
out of that comes out. I mean, it's that
yeah,
I
you'll have to tell me if you find some kind of, documentation for that. I've heard it. I don't know if it's true.
Jewish books though in the New World.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what Mindy's got from the question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. Well, what a wonderful and enriching dialogue between the two of you. All right, let me meld some questions with some of my own. In terms of the world of Jewish publishing, Malka, you mentioned small Jewish presses,
Mhm.
and you mentioned a few. Could you say some more about that world? Also, across the seas and oceans, what do we see overseas in terms of what would be a specific Jewish press in France or Germany or England? Do you have any connection with those worlds?
I have very little connection, to be honest, with presses that are not working either in Hebrew or English. I do have colleagues who are working in the Spanish language spaces of Jewish literature. It's not my space. We do have some communication with small presses in Israel, such as Magnus, which is affiliated with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And in many ways, Magnus and JPS are very, very similar. They have this kind of storied legacy. They're a small team. They put out excellent books. They consider themselves to be kind of embedded in Jewish Israeli culture, and they're part of the origin story of Israeli resilience and the founding of, the renewal, let's say, of Jewish life in the land of Israel. So Magnus is wonderful, and we have a nice relationship with them. We're also in touch with Koren, which is publishing a huge number of volumes every year, over 100. And Koren is very interesting because they're publishing and selling books both in North America and in the English speaking world, and in Israel, and in Spanish language countries. And also they're translating the books of Rabbi Sachs and other books into other languages. So Koren is getting into the translation market, which is very interesting. Koren is specifically geared, I would say, towards the Orthodox Jewish world, and maybe even more narrowly towards the centrist to modern Orthodox Jewish world. All of these presses have a place. I praise the Littman Library of Jewish Civilization. Their director, I think she's based in Warsaw, but as I said, they're working with Liverpool University Press. So they're kind of, I would say, European. All of these places have something to contribute that's distinctive. I will say, not to put down any other press, I would never want to do that, but there's something unique about JPS as a cross-denominational press. When you look at Jewish presses, a lot of them have a kind of denominational orientation. Koren is geared towards the Orthodox world, and there are many Orthodox presses, of course. There's Philtime and Mosaica and Art Scroll, and that is not JPS's space. JPS will, I hope, always honor its cross-denominational commitment, and the reading communities that we want to build are hopefully going to bring Jews together, and dissolve maybe, or at least cross those denominational lines. So we're not saying this is the kind of Jew that we want to reach. But again, Koren is doing great work. They published the entire library of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, and kind of parallel to Yale's Jewish Live series, they put out excellent volumes that focus on individual Jewish thinkers in contemporary times. So there's a lot going on. These are all small presses. There's a lot going on. There's also a lot of room for partnership. And that's one of the things I'm going to be exploring in the coming years is what would it look like to partner, not to merge, not to be purchased, but what would a partnership look like where we can make our business a little bit easier for one another. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think that there's a lot of potential.
Wow, there are lots of other sessions we could have on this rich world that you're alluding to. Okay, we talk about outreach. What about outreach to the many publications such as the Washington Jewish Week across the country? There must be a significant number. Do they reach out to you? Do you reach out to them? And what kind of feedback do they give you or suggestions for publications?
Are you talking about outlets that review our books?
Not necessarily. For example, I'm talking about the Washington Jewish Week, local papers that cover Jewish life in City X, but also more broadly. And there are a number of these newspapers or weeklies across the country. Do you have any dialogue with them?
Not unless they are reviewing books. We are trying to reach outlets that have book review columns. So we're putting together this big, what we're calling the master outreach spreadsheet, with as many, we've got one tab for Judaica bookstores and one for Jewish newspapers and, one for venue sites for book launches. So we're gathering all this information. We're making connections. We're reaching out. We're hustling all the time. When a new book comes out, we're trying to connect our authors with venues, with podcast hosts, with columnists. But unless a small Jewish newspaper has some kind of book review column, I wouldn't say that we have an active relationship with them. Although, of course, I'm very happy to talk to anyone. And, I'm just an email away. So I love it when people reach out.
Okay. There were a couple of questions early on how your time at the Catholic Theological Union has influenced your own thinking, raised new questions for you. And a sort of subcategory to that, what kind of questions are you getting from the Catholic students about the Jewish traditions, about the Jewish teachings? So there are interplays and cross currents here, and say something about that.
This is a huge topic. I was at CTU for 10 years. I'm no longer there, but I'm in touch with many of my students and some of my colleagues. And the Catholic Church is very complicated, of course, not just because there's over 1 billion people who affiliate with the church, but also because demographics are changing very fast, and the church is shrinking in North America and Europe and growing in spaces where there are very few Jews and sometimes no Jews at all. Catholic Theological Union is a very international school for that reason. It was founded in the late 60s in Chicago, and originally it brought together seminarians and graduate students from the Chicago area, but soon it became kind of a national institution. It was the biggest Catholic graduate school in the country for years. But because of the demographic changes in the church, I would say at least half, maybe even 2/3 of its students are now international. And the reason why that's important is because these are students who are coming into master's and doctoral programs not having encountered living Judaism. And so part of my job as the chair of Jewish studies was to kind of disabuse them of certain impressions that they had, either from thinking with a hermeneutical Jew in their mind, having read the New Testament, or having read the church fathers who wrote about the Jews, and also, again, just having watched TV. And so they knew the Holocaust, they knew anti-Semitism, they had definitely a sense of what we would call the lacrimose understanding of Jewish history, where Jewish history is, one experience of suffering after another. And unfortunately, that did play into some of my students' understandings of what the theological function of the Jew is today, which is to wander and be a kind of a living witness to their rejection of the Christ. So many of my students, I would say nearly all of my students, were wonderful. And these impressions did not come from a space of malintent or antagonism, but they simply had not encountered living Judaism. The passion that I have for bringing knowledge of diverse contemporary Judaism into the world, I think derives from what I saw at Catholic Theological Union, which is that we tend to look at communities, whether it's our own or others, as monolithic and homogenous. And the resilience of Judaism, I think, lies in the fact that it has this kind of creative mechanism, this energy that gives it vibrancy and diversity. And I think that we need to honor that. And I've been thinking about that well before I joined JPS.
Okay, we have a nice general question, which again could take a couple of hours to answer.
Oh, no.
Wait. What is your impression from your academic involvement and your perch now about a decline generally in reading and how you think that could affect the future of a JPS or other publishers or presses for that matter?
Again, I think a lot of this remains to be seen. Speaking as someone who likes to think a lot about the Hellenistic world, Jewish literacy rates were always a little bit, let's say, more encouraging than literacy rates in other communities, at least, again, the Hellenistic setting. Does this have to do with Shabbat rest, that Jews, are always going to need books? Or I think it's actually much more than that. I don't think it's just about not being able to turn on a computer, at least, if you're Orthodox or Shabbat observant. I think it's about values. I think it's about valuing a library and honoring and respecting the sacred book, the sacred text. I mean, we've built an entire religion around sacred scriptures. And I think that there's a reverence that Jews still have. I need to be optimistic because that's the nature of my job. I need to believe in the future of the Jewish book and in the future of the Jewish idea. I have to be radically optimistic. And, yes, it is very, very concerning. I've got 4 kids. I have 3 teenagers, and I see how easy it is to go onto ChatGPT. And, my kids will say, and their friends too, they'll say, we get the outlines for the essays from ChatGPT, or it's the starting question, or they're polishing it. There's so many excuses we can make to get machines to do our work for us. So much justification. But it's connected, I think, to the fact that our attention spans are changing, and we need to kind of double down and produce students who will value the discipline, the hours that it requires to do research. That's really, really hard, but I have to stay optimistic that we'll continue to have writers and we'll continue to have readers.
Malka, that's a wonderful note to close at least this encounter with you. I think you've told us so much that will really provoke our thinking and hopefully end in some submissions to you by people listening and their friends. Amy, would you like to say anything in conclusion from your part?
Just to echo our thanks to Malka for talking to us and for giving me so much enlightening information about the world that I've I can only see in from a very different angle. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a pleasure, and thank you again to the organizers as well, Mindy and Jerry.
Okay, Jerry, if you'd like to come in here and say some closing words yourself.
Well, I'd like to first both thank Malka and Amy and wish them both the rest of the great, happy Mother's Day. And a happy Mother's Day to all the other mothers who are in the audience over here. Myself, I don't celebrate Mother's Day very much, but I do wish all my relatives and friends a happy Mother's Day. It was a great information course that the two of you put together or developed, I guess is a better word. I learned a lot, and I think other people did also. For the Jewish Studies Center right now, we're going to have a little vacation in some sense. The next class is not scheduled for a month. We're going to have a class late in June, I think in June 22nd, about how the Holocaust can be combated in some sense by art and nature. And I have mentioned recently, if people have ideas of something that they'd like to teach or something that they'd like to learn, you can send us an email at info@jewishstudiescenter.org. And maybe, a lot of our classes come that way. A lot of our instructors come that way also. So again, thank both of you. It was an amazing conversation. And Malka, I really would like you to teach a class about the Hellenistic period or the first century sometime in the future. That sounds like a wonderful thing for me. I'd like to learn about Jewish history. We've had so little about Jewish history in this series recently that it would be a great idea. Okay, thank you, everybody. And thank you also, Mindy, for the great questions that you posed and for your introduction.
Shalom, everyone.
Hello.
And
Thanks.
Laila
And I will be
Tov.
sending an
You guys.
email out.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care.